So our next lecture is on the quadratic formula. So now this is another method that we can use to find the solutions to a quadratic equation, or the roots, and this is how it works. So let's say that we have a general quadratic equation. So we have ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. Now what we can do is we can find the solutions to this using a formula that only depends on a, b, and c, and the formula looks like this. So we're going to now have two solutions, and the solutions are negative b plus or minus, so that's why we're going to have two solutions, the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. Okay, so that right there is the quadratic formula. Now, in order to make sense of it, though, you'll have to remember that the a, b, and c are referring to the coefficients in this particular order. So let's begin with this example here, x squared plus 2x minus 15. Now, first, if it's possible, you should factor out any common constant, and then you could divide through by that to make it a little bit simpler. But here we already have sort of the coefficients. They don't have any common factors other than 1. So let's proceed with using the quadratic formula. So a in this situation is 1, the coefficient of x squared. B is positive 2. And c is negative 15. So now we use these to get our solutions. So the solutions are x is equal to negative b, so negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 2 squared, minus 4 times 1 times c, so negative 4ac, and then divided by 2a, so divided by 2 times 1. And then now we just have to simplify this expression. So we have x is negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 minus, and that's negative 4 times negative 15, so this will be actually positive 60 divided by 2. So this is negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 64, and 64 is a perfect square. Square root of 64 is 8. So we're going to be able to simplify this a little bit more. So we have x is negative 2 plus or minus 8 over 2. So that's negative 1, dividing by 2 in both of these, plus or minus 4. So x is negative 1 plus 4. X is negative 1 minus 4. So that's x is 3, and x is negative 5. And if you were to solve this by factoring, we would see that the factors would actually have to be, what? They would have to be positive 5 and negative 3, and then when you go to solve the roots by property of 0, these would be your solutions. So that looks correct. Okay, so our next example, 12x squared plus 2x minus 2. Now notice that there is a common factor of 2 among all these coefficients, so if we factor that out, well, you know what, instead of factoring out, we could divide the whole equation by 2. So if I divide all these by that common factor, you see this is just going to become a simpler equation, so this will actually be 6x squared plus x minus 1 equals 0. The only reason to do that is just to make the a, b, and c a little bit smaller, and therefore, the arithmetic will be a little bit easier. So if you don't do this step, it's perfectly fine. You could still use the quadratic formula, and you'll get the correct answers in the end. It's just, it's a little easier to deal with these numbers. So now we have our a is 6, our b is 1, and our c is negative 1. So now taking this and plugging it into the quadratic formula, we have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 AC all over 2a. And let's simplify. So this is -1 plus or minus the square root of 1 minus, and that's a double minus, so this will be plus 24. And that's good because in the end we'll get 25, which is the perfect square, divided by 12. And now this is -1 plus or minus the square root of 25 over 12. And so that's -1 plus or minus 5 over 12. And so we have our two solutions, right? So we have -1 plus 5 over 12, and x is -1 minus 5 over 12. And so then this will be 4 over 12, and x is -6 over 12, and those simplify. So this is 1/3, and this is -1/2. Okay, next problem, we have 3x squared plus 3x minus 36. Notice again we have a common factor of 3 here. So we could divide everything by 3, and that will definitely make things simpler. So we'll get x squared plus x minus 12, right? Okay, and this is definitely simpler, right? Because now a is 1 and b is 1, whereas before it would have been 3 and 3, and who wants to deal with that if you can make it simpler, right? Okay, so now our solutions are x is equal to -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And this is -1 plus or minus the square root of 1 plus 48 is 49, so that's square root of 49 over 2. So that's -1 plus or minus 7 over 2. So then this is x is -1 plus 7 over 2, or x is -1 minus 7 over 2. So this is x is 6 over 2, which is 3, or x is -8 over 2, which is -4. So those two actually ended up being pretty nice in the end. All right, now next one, 5x squared equals 20x minus 5. Well, okay, so we have a common factor of 5 among everything, so we could divide by that. And we'd have x squared equals 4x minus 1. And before we proceed, we need to write this into the standard form, right? We need to have a quadratic on one side. So we'll bring this 4x over, subtracting, and we'll bring this over as plus 1. And then now we can read off a is 1, b is -4, and c is 1. So you have to be very careful, right? If you started to read off your a, b, and c from this, then you would actually get the negatives for b and c, and that's not correct, right? So make sure that you always write it into the standard form of the quadratic equals 0, all right, just like we had at the top. And then now the quadratic formula, x is -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so this is 4 plus or minus the square root of what? So that's 16, then that's minus 4, so 16 minus 4 is 12 over 2. And 12 is not a perfect square, but we could factor that as square root of 4, square root of 3. And now we will have 4 plus or minus 2 root 3 over 2. And now we can write out our two solutions. So what are we going to have here? So we will have x is 4 plus 2 root 3 over 2, and x is 4 minus 2 root 3 over 2. And this simplifies, right? Because I could divide both of these by 2, like 4 over 2 plus 2 root 3 over 2, x is 4 over 2 minus 2 over 2 root 3. And this is 2 plus 1 root 3. So root 3. And x is 2 minus 1 root 3. So that's root 3. And so we have actually 2 plus or minus root 3 as our solutions. And then finally, we have this one. So negative x minus 2x plus 4. And so do we have any common factors that we want to divide by? Well, looks like we're good here. So a is negative 1, b is negative 2, and c is 4. So quadratic formula, x is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so what is this? So this is 2 plus or minus square root of, that'll be 4, and that'll be plus 16, so that'll be square root of 20 over negative 2. And 20 is not a perfect square, but we could factor that as square root of 4 times square root of 5 over negative 2. And so then we have x is 2 plus or minus 2 root 5 over negative 2. And we're going to get our two solutions, right? We have x is 2 plus 2 root 5 over negative 2, or x is 2 minus 2 root 5 over negative 2. And we can simplify that a little bit more. Dividing each of these by negative 2, we will have negative 1 minus 1 root 5, so root 5. And then we will have negative 1 plus root 5. So it's really negative 1 plus or minus root 5.